We think of the Victorian era, we think of regal ladies, don't we? Well, I know I do. And you think of sort of like great ball gowns, men in suitable dressing room attire, the sort of thing, cravats, almost a little bit ahead of its time, but Noel Coward. But of course, royals had to look impeccable even then, and none more so because when they were out and about spotted, they really had to stand out from the crowd. And that's really how sort of social dressing took off, because you wanted to emulate that particular individual, whether it be, of course, one of the princesses, the daughters of the queen or whatever, and their hairstyle, their latest colour that they were wearing, all of the sort of things that really we look at today, and perhaps they're all through like Instagram or influencers, to coin a phrase, the sort of thing I mean. And really, when you look at stories of old, the story goes, for instance, that the late Queen Victoria, could not abide anybody who had, how should we put this, cosmetic enhancement. Couldn't stand it. But truly, how true is it? As ever, let me explain. Chums, nice to see you today. Thank you so much, as ever, for your company and your time. I don't know about you, but, and I think I'll say this to the fellas out there, I think we're all literally bought into certain branding. Doesn't matter who you are. I was literally looking for some new razors, and you've seen this, right, fellas? And they'll say things like, the slogan, the best a man can get, and it's like 5 or 7 blades. Or, say another blade, and you think, well, no, it's all down to really the sharpness of the blade and the accessibility, and I would say also the cream that you use, you know what I'm saying? But we all want to believe, it's like those adverts on the telly where, they'll show a woman and suddenly, eliminates wrinkles. And the girl in there is about, 25. And you think, why don't you have somebody who you're actually targeting, say a lady over 50, and be realistic about exactly what it shows, the sort of thing. But that's really about marketing. And the Victorian era, was no different. This is because it was the time really where advertising took off at a great rate. The thing about complexions, wonderful bars of soap that were going to give you instantly younger looking skin. This was the era where Victorian ladies, and into the Edwardian era, where they really believed it. They thought, wow, because after all, you had people, society ladies, people, of course, later on, people like, one of the king's mistresses, Lily Langtry, famously getting a mega deal for Pears soap. And apparently, if you wanted skin like Miss Langtry, well, you just had to use Pears. You see how this works. But of course, Queen Victoria, as I said, was known for her slightly, shall we say, sour and dour look. Or was she? You see, according to the records and excellent sort of information that you can now find out, you see, the Queen didn't like, and get this, any of her servants at all with any cosmetic enhancement. But what she didn't realise was that some of the servants did in fact wear makeup. And this was because quite a lot of them who were chorus girls and, backstage ladies, as it were, that the then Prince of Wales, King Edward later, well, he decided to give jobs to many of them if they were resting or being thrown out or hadn't been able to get work in vaudeville or indeed music hall. And this was a great way of keeping his mistresses on tap. I kid you not. And apparently this didn't escape the attention of Queen Victoria. She couldn't quite believe how some of them had, just instantly red rosy cheeks, or indeed beautiful long lashes. And so she set about finding this out, particularly when she was getting ready to sit for a portrait. And this was a regular thing, as you and I perhaps now taking a year picture or a holiday snap or something. Every so often she had to sit for a portrait so that the public could get to see what the Queen looked like at this particular point. She didn't like the look because clearly, like we all do, you see new wrinkles and greys and things and think, well, no, I don't want this. And one day, according to those records, she got chatting to one of the maids, didn't realise that this particular maid was in fact also a chorus girl. You see, according to Queen Victoria, only ladies of the night and actresses wore enhancement. But she did want to look her best for her portraits, and in particular, of late, had made friends, of course, with people like Abdul Karim. She suddenly wanted to look better when in his presence. Likewise, of course, John Brown. We know all of that. She was looking at a way of making herself look a little bit more appealing. And what happened was she decided, just for the portraits, of course, to take on some of those beauty tips that were shared to her by these terrible actresses and sometimes ladies of the night who were possibly having, shall we say, relations with her son, the Prince of Wales. And these could be anything from using beetroot dye for blusher, or indeed burnt out matches and sticks to dye your lashes with a little bit of water to make them look black, long and luscious. And I kid you not, it's all there in the information. On certain portraits, after they'd been painted, the Queen would instruct them exactly where she wanted more colour, more light and more what we now call, Photoshop, erasing. But this was truly all down to the people that were suddenly perpetuating inside, of course, Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. As I said, she had no idea that many of these forthright, outgoing girls were suddenly, well, very, very, how shall we say, forward indeed. And they came with a look. And they certainly weren't going to change it, because many, in fact, after a day's work in, say, royal service, particularly if they didn't have such a strenuous job, may also pick up 1 or 2 nights a week performing on the halls. And they had to be makeup ready. And if they did sleep in and return to work the day after, and sadly were still wearing some of it, for instance, it didn't go unnoticed by the then Queen Victoria. Hence the reason you will note in certain portraits she looks far more glamorous than in others. But of course, to the outside world, no, she never wore makeup. Fascinating, don't you think? And as ever, what I find fun about this is everybody basically says, no, I don't do that. But even back then, people were actually fudging the truth about how they put themselves together. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.